As a mirror image of the above considerations, need for non-specific closure may be lowered, and that to avoid such closure heightened, by conditions that highlight the costs of closure and extol the benefits of openness. In some circumstances, the costs of closure may be rendered salient by fear of invalidity, stemming from concern about committing a costly error of judgment. Under these conditions, the person may be prone to suspend judgment altogether or avoid premature closure. Yet validity concerns do not necessarily clash with those of closure. Obviously, no one would consciously adopt a closure that she or he adjudged invalid. In fact, the common sense notion of knowing connotes a sense of closure coupled with subjective validity. To know that one's name is John or that it happens to be Tuesday now means to have closures on these topics and simultaneously believe these closures to be true. Nonetheless, psychological concerns for closure and validity often arise fairly independently of each other. What is more important, they pull information processing in diametrically opposite directions. For example, where need for closure is elevated for some reason, for example, because of situational impediments to information processing like fatigue or noise, the individual may consider limited information, and/or rely on preconceived notions, prejudices, and cultural stereotypes in reaching social judgments. To the contrary, where need for closure is reduced, for example, by felt accountability for one's decisions, or by fear of the costs of making a false move, one might consider ample information before making up one's mind. Yet in the former case, the person may not be cognizant of sacrificing validity, and in the latter case, of postponing closure. Rather, in both cases he may feel to have processed just the right amount of information to make a reasonably secure judgment. In other words, the epistemic dynamics prompted by the needs for closure and for its avoidance are not assumed to be consciously accessible to the knower, but rather to exert their effects implicitly and outside of awareness. It is important to realize that validity concerns may not always lower the need for closure or foster openness to new ideas or information. If a particular closure appeared valid beyond reasonable doubt, for instance because its source, one's parents, an adored guru, or the printed page, appeared of impeccable credibility or indubitable epistemic authority. Kruglanski, 1989, Ellis and Kruglanski, 1992, validity concerns might magnify the tendency to embrace it rather than to avoid or postpone it until having considered ample further information. The need for non-specific closure may be lowered, and that to avoid closure heightened, for other reasons as well. When the task is intrinsically enjoyable and interesting, for example, individuals may wish to immerse themselves in its exploration for the sheer pleasure of it, and prolong the enjoyment to the extent possible rather than undercutting it by driving for the bottom line. Who has not experienced the frustration of asking an expert, e.g., a statistical consultant, a seemingly simple question only to see him/her delve into a complicated analysis with only a minimal relation to the original query? The expert in this case may relish the process of searching for an answer much more than the answer itself, hence he may prolong the process to the inquirer's consternation. The need for closure may be lowered where any conceivable closure seemed potentially difficult, problematic, or dangerous. For instance, in a conflict among friends, one may be motivated to refrain from deciding who is right, for this may risk undermining the relationship with at least one of the parties. Also, in negotiating a conflictual situation, one may frame some of the more difficult issues ambiguously so that progress may be achieved, and positive momentum built, on the basis of matters that are simpler or easier to deal with. Indeed, the expression of any definite opinion or preference, e.g., on aesthetic, ethical, or political issues, might be offensive to at least some individuals. Hence, one may refrain from expressing or even forming an opinion when in the company of strangers whose tastes and preferences are unknown. One may be more likely to form opinions in the presence of intimate friends with whom one feels safe, hence free to be one's own self and to speak one's uncensored mind. Of course, some strong-headed individuals may form clear-cut and often extreme opinions regardless of the delicacy of the situation, whereas other, particularly cautious, persons may feel uncomfortable about rendering a definite judgment and prefer to suspend it in even the safest of environments. As already noted, people may exhibit considerable individual differences in their tendencies to approach and avoid cognitive closure. To tap such individual differences, Donna Webster and I, Webster and Kruglansky, 1994, have developed the need for closure scale and established its reliability and validity. The scale has been translated into several languages: Cantonese, Croat, Dutch, French, German, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin Chinese, and Spanish. Hence, it affords the cross-cultural investigation of issues associated with closed and open-mindedness. Since its publication a decade ago, Webster and Kruglansky's 1994 scale appears to have held up well both structurally and functionally, across its various translations and the heterogeneous contexts in which it has been applied. Nonetheless, work on this scale continues in order to further improve its psychometric properties and to reduce its length so as to make its application less laborious and time-consuming. In summary, individuals' motivational attitudes toward non-specific cognitive closure may be induced by a wide range of factors. Some of these may have to do with persons' relatively stable dispositions, Webster and Kruglansky, 1994, or with cultural norms or mores prevalent in a given society, Hofstede, 1980, Levine, 1985. Others may relate to mundane everyday circumstances, e.g., time pressure, boredom, noise, or fatigue. In this latter sense, far from being esoteric or restricted, the phenomena of closed and open-mindedness form a pervasive feature of everyday life. Approach and avoidance needs for specific closures. A plethora of diverse factors may render a given closure desirable or undesirable. Some may be situation-specific, others may reflect relatively stable tendencies of the person, yet others may characterize entire societies or cultures. A situationally desirable closure may relate to the individual's needs, wishes, and desires in a particular context. A high premium one places on career advancement, for example, may render agreement with one's boss desirable. The contents of that agreement would then depend specifically on the boss's opinion on a given issue at a given time and a given place. To a situationally hungry individual, the belief that food is forthcoming might represent a desirable closure, and to a lonely person, that company and social support are forthcoming. Some desirable closures may derive from widespread cultural values, such as freedom, democracy, courage, family, or a slim figure. Others may originate from one's personal upbringing and socialization history, e.g., the desirability of beliefs that one is economically well off, independent, strong-willed, assertive, etc. Similarly, one's need to avoid specific closures may stem from a variety of sources. Thus, reactance against an attempt to usurp one's freedoms, Brehm, 1966, could identify the usurper's suggestion precisely as the closure to be avoided. Antisocial thoughts, e.g., sexual or aggressive fantasies about forbidden figures such as one's parents, may also represent closures one strives to avoid or defend against. Occasionally, different undesirable or different desirable closures may conflict with each other, e.g., the desirable beliefs that 1. One is realistic about one's limited potential and 2. One will be extremely successful in whatever task one chooses to pursue, cf. Swan, 1990. In such a case, the stronger of the two motivations will have the upper hand.